Hey everybody, Gromos here, and this time I got another Star Citizen video. Now, version 0.9 of the Arena Commander dogfight module was released last week and brought quite a few additions and changes to the game, so I thought it is time for another little update video. There are two new game modes, which I want to show gameplay from in this video. One is the new racing mode, and the other one is a co-op mode versus the Vanduul. And there are a lot of other changes I want to talk about while I do so. I also want to give a bit of feedback on both the TrackIR implementation as well as the new lead aim point aiming, which replaced the auto aim we had before, and the difference between gimbaled and fixed weapons. Well then, let's talk a little bit about the racing and general improvements of this version of the game. One of the big things in this patch was the introduction of the racing map, which is located in the upper atmosphere of a planet and looks quite beautiful, as well as the introduction of two ships specialized in racing, the M50 and the Origin 350R. Now, I have to say, racing positively surprised me. While I always thought that having those races in the game and having different racing events and the like all over the galaxy is nice, I was not sure if that is something that I personally would enjoy a whole lot. But after trying it a bit, I have to say racing is actually quite fun. Now, I of course only fly the normal 300i trainer here, not one of the faster dedicated racing ships, and the racing track is of course pretty basic and not all too challenging. But I am pretty sure that is on purpose, to have an easy track to start out with, so people can train and get used to it. But despite that, it actually gets the adrenaline flowing when you try to line up the gates properly and keep from sliding too much to miss it or ram an obstacle. Especially with the changes in the flight model, which is pretty nice too, I would say. Ship speeds are about double of what they used to be without the afterburner in older versions of the game. But the acceleration without afterburner is much lower now in all directions. That means that when you abruptly change direction, you will keep drifting in the initial direction for a lot longer, so you have to fly with some foresight. And the afterburner does no longer increase the top speed of the ship, however it increases the acceleration, and it does so in all directions, so you can use it to quickly strafe out of the way of an obstacle. I'm fairly sure there will be more challenging tracks available in the future, and then I think you will really be able to do cool things, like for example use the decoupled mode to drift sideways through a 90-degree corner. Also, the gameplay you see in the background was only my second try in the race mode. The first one was cut short by annoying Windows sticky keys kicking me out of the game. So, because I was new to this, I was still trying to follow the track pretty precisely. I later figured out that you can actually take shortcuts flying through the floating building complexes, which is a great way to get your lap time down and add some skill if you want to drift through those things properly with the nose pointing at the next gate when you are through the building complex. So that in combination with more challenging racetracks that I expect will be released later, will lead to some exciting races in the future, I hope. So overall I am quite happy with this feature. I like racing better than I thought I would. Now, what else is new in version 0.9? Well, we have some improvements to the HUD, hangars got revamped, and we finally got TrackIR support, which is great, but I will talk more about that in the combat part of the video. And the sound had also been greatly improved. The sound effects were a critic point in earlier versions of the game, but in 0.9 they are much better and sound pretty nice, I would say, and also give good feedback about hits, and it just sounds nice when a fighter whooshes by you. Now, as soon as you start talking about sound, there will of course be a few that immediately point out that there is no sound in space and you should not hear weapons fire or ships whooshing by in the first place. But don't worry, that is actually explained in the game's lore. The idea is that the sound is, so to speak, simulated by your ship's computer to increase the situational awareness of the pilot, and that makes a lot of sense in my opinion. I depend on sound for my situational awareness a lot in all kinds of games and simulators, so that a future starfighter designer would think it is a good idea to add sound to increase the pilot's awareness sounds quite believable to me. If you still don't like it, it will supposedly be possible to turn the sound in space off in the finished game. But well then, let's take a look at the second game mode and some combat related changes. The second new game mode that was added in version 0.9 is a co-op mode, basically the single-player Vandal Swarm mode, but with real players as wingmen. You can either just play on a public server with random wingmen or with friends in a private game, though the private games were temporarily disabled when I played. So that's nice for people that prefer multiplayer PvE over PvP, and I think it helps to get a feel how doing PvE missions in a persistent universe might feel when it comes out. I have only tried it with the public teams as of yet, which is nice, but I think the real fun comes in when you try to beat the swarm with your friends with TeamSpeak and all. Now, while another real cool addition to the game in this patch was the TrackIR support, something I was looking forward to since a while. The game is of course still in early alpha, so the TrackIR support is not 100% perfect yet, however it's already working pretty well, I would say. One small issue is that the pilot does not move with the point of view yet, so sometimes you can see your own pilot, but that's a small issue and does not really have an impact on the playability. You do get the full 6 dimensions of freedom, and that really adds to the immersion of the game, as head tracking devices tend to do in games you play from the cockpit. And as you can see in the footage, you can use the TrackIR to aim gimbaled weapons with your head movement. Some attack helicopters are known to have that option as well. So that's pretty cool. With the large ball turret on the Hornet, you can even fire on targets behind you when you look back. It has to be said though that aiming with your head movement needs some getting used to. It is not that easy. After all, I'm only used to use TrackIR to look around, not to aim weapons with it. That is new to me, so in that sense it is like using a new input device for the first time. As is usually the case when you do that, it needs a bit of time till you're really good at it. Some muscle memory needs to be built up. So currently I'm not that accurate with it, but we will see how accurate you can get if you train it a bit. That brings me to 2 small issues I have with the implementation of this feature. First, in some situations it would be preferable if the weapons are bore-sighted and decoupled from the view, just fixed forward firing. It would be nice to have a button that simply bore-sights the gun, so you can just fire them forward while looking at something else. And another thing is, if you fly a fighter with fixed weapons, the rounded pipper you aim the guns with is still moving with your view. Only a small and hard to see mini crosshair shows you where your guns are actually pointing. That can get really confusing, because you constantly try to aim with the big round pipper that is connected to your view. But that would be easily fixed. If your guns are fixed forward firing, the rounded pipper should be fixed as well and not move with your view as it currently does. Now, since we are talking about fixed and gimbaled weapons, there are some changes to how you aim your guns in Star Citizen. Pretty big ones actually. Now, until now all the guns were gimbaled, fixed weapons were not really in the game, and the weapons had a bit of an auto-aim. The way that worked was, you aimed your pipper straight on the target, it would turn green and your guns automatically calculated the lead. This is gone, the guns no longer have any auto-aim, only a certain auto-convergence. Now, you have a lead aim point or multiple lead aim points if you have guns with different projectile speeds, and you have to point your guns at the lead aim point to get the necessary lead, as you would expect. Now, that change I would say is in general a good one. I don't like auto-aim very much, and I think having to aim the guns manually is better. However, I think the implementation still needs some tweaking. The gimbaled weapons work fine, I would say, however the fixed ones appear to be a lot weaker overall. I think currently the gap between gimbaled weapons and fixed ones is way too high. I think having the fixed weapons is fine and they work fine, but I think they need some extra damage, rate of fire or projectile speed to make up for the loss of the gimbal. And that would also be important for the next topic I want to talk about, a balancing problem which I think needs some work in the future and I want to give some feedback about. Well, after all the talk about fixed and gimbaled weapons, if you are a player that plans to play Star Citizen with a joystick and does not have a TrackIR or Oculus Rift, you might currently ask yourself, well, how do I aim those gimbaled weapons? Well, that would be a very good question, and the answer is most likely you don't. If you fly in this game with a mouse, you can aim the gimbaled weapons with a control scheme similar to that of Freelancer, or if you fly with a joystick or a HOTAS, you can do it with a TrackIR or an Oculus Rift. But just with the joystick, you are most likely going to end up just using the guns as fixed weapons, as I have done before TrackIR support was implemented, as you can see in my older Star Citizen videos, but back then the guns had a bit of an auto-aim. Now, there are always suggestions on how you could use the gimbaled weapons without head tracking, but quite frankly, most of them won't work very well or won't work at all. Some suggest that you could use the joystick's head switch to look around and aim the guns. Now, I used the head switch in the old days in simulators to look around, and this thing is barely accurate enough to look around. Unless you plan on attacking planets from very short range, you won't hit anything trying to aim a gun with a head switch. Another suggestion that comes up a lot is that you could have the stick in the right hand to fly and the mouse in the left hand to aim the weapons. But that is just not realistic. Again, I tried that in the past as view control in simulators, and that actually was worse than the head switch. It is next to impossible to maneuver while aiming the weapons at the same time with the left hand, at least with any kind of accuracy. On top of that, having the left hand on the mouse would mean you could not have it on the keyboard or the throttle unit of the HOTAS, which means you would have a whole lot less buttons available, and you would most likely not be able to use the full 6 dimensions of freedom flight model. So, in the end, if you fly with a joystick and you don't have a head tracker, you will probably end up doing what I did and just use the weapons as fixed weapons. Instead of pointing the gimbaled weapons at the target, you have to point the nose of the ship at the target. And that obviously presents a balancing problem, and not a small one. Let's take the 3 base trainer ships with their basic loadout as an example. Now, the loadout can be changed, but for the sake of the argument, let's take a look at the ships with their basic loadout. One of the advantages of the Hornet currently is that all the weapons are gimbaled. The ones on the 300i trainer and Aurora trainer are fixed, so if you choose to fly the Hornet with only a joystick, you most likely throw that advantage away, because you can't use the gimbals in any kind of efficient manner. That's why usually if you want to make a space sim where all input methods are equal, as was advertised for Star Citizen, the first thing you don't do is design ships with gimbaled weapons. Because they present a balancing nightmare, you just can't use them with a joystick alone. You could not do it in Freelancer, and you can't do it here. Well, but now the gimbaled weapons are in the game and they are here to stay, and I have to say, using them with TrackIR is pretty cool. But that means CIG needs to come up with a proper solution to balance this out. And I can think of one rather simple way to do that, but for that we need proper balance between gimbaled weapons and fixed ones. The fixed ones need to have enough of an upside over the gimbaled ones to be just as good. If that is the case, a simple solution would be to make it possible for all fighters to switch out all gimbaled weapons for fixed ones. Now, to a certain point you can already do that, you just have to change the weapon mounts from gimbaled to fixed. I don't know about the ball turret though. There needs to be a fixed alternative for this one as well. Maybe one that can carry 3 weapons instead of 2 to make up for the fact that it is fixed. And then, if you are a joystick pilot that can't use the gimbaled weapons, you can switch out all the gimbaled ones for fixed ones. But again, they need to have enough of an upside over the gimbaled ones to make that work. Currently, this is not the case, so some balancing work needs to be done here. Well, and that was just a bit of feedback on the gimbaled and fixed weapons I wanted to give. And this is it for this video. I hope this little look at the version 0.9 of Star Citizen was enjoyable. Thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.